Hello and welcome to the Three Will Podcast. This is your host Danny Ryan, and today I have Mr. Bruce Harple. You're not Sir Bruce. I was going to say Sir Bruce Harple.
I like the Sir though. Maybe you and Tommy can knight me.
Yes, sir. We are getting together today to talk about a very important subject, something you're doing day in, day out, which is managing project risks. And so let's get kicked off with that subject, and maybe if you can just start us out with an overall definition or just something to give us some grounding on the subject.
Yeah, absolutely, Danny. And again, I'm thrilled to be here. Thrilled to be talking about how do we kind of manage project risk, because it's a critical part of every engagement, every project we do with our customers. Mm-hmm. So I kind of start out with the dictionary definition of risk, which is a lot of words, and I'll kind of then net it out a bit, and I'll kind of flip it into what would be a good definition of risk around an IT project. But the textbook definition is a probability or threat of damage, injury, liability, loss, or any other negative occurrence that is caused by external or internal vulnerabilities, and that may be avoided through preemptive action.
Ooh,
that's a good one. I mean, I picked that one out because it had a lot of great words. But if I had to net it out right and kind of pare that down, it's really, risk it's a threat, right? It's a threat to the success of your project, your solution, caused by some vulnerability, right? Something that maybe you do or don't control. It could be environmental, it could be organizational, could be technical. But it can be avoided through some preemptive action. We would call that mitigation. Mm-hmm. That's kind of the net of it. And then I kind of said, well, what does that really mean? Kind of, the risks, the definition of risk is different in any industry, right? But from an IT perspective, when we think about, at least when we think about risk, and as we go after projects with customers, I really look at a risk as something that threatens the scope, schedule, or budget of a project, right? We call that the iron triangle, right? Mm-hmm. That's the three sides you're trying to manage as you work through a project. But also, a risk is something to me that would threaten adoption of the solution, right? Once you're done, because you can build the best solution in the world, or what you think is the best solution in the world, but if it's not adopted, not used, then essentially you failed. And then also security, right? That's becoming more and more important in today's world. So you really got to think about that and be real proactive in how you kind of manage that aspect of your project. So that's kind of flipping it into kind of with more of an IT focus.
So somebody with adoption, the risk is nobody's using it, and then with security, the issue is if someone's using it in the wrong way,
or everyone's using it,
or everyone's using it,
and they're not supposed to be using
not it. Not enough or too many. That's
right. Not enough or too many. Exactly.
Excellent. What's next?
Well, what I wanted to talk about next is just to kind of frame up, kind of in the IT world, as we work with businesses and work with customers, what do we see as, kind of the areas of, common risks, or where do we see the vulnerabilities, right? What are those vulnerabilities? And, I kind of listed them under, these buckets. There's business vulnerabilities, technology vulnerabilities, people vulnerabilities, adoption, which we've talked about, and then I added collaboration as well. Those are kind of the 5 areas of kind of vulnerabilities, right? Things that could, within that could impact and add risk to a project.
I'm surprised you don't have a 6th bucket that's called Danny.
Well, we can mitigate Danny.
You can mitigate me. Oh, nice. Is that what people call it? Keep me away from projects? They're mitigating me?
We're mitigating Danny.
Excellent. Well, let's go into those different buckets.
Yeah, and kind of what I did is just kind of maybe identify some examples of what those vulnerabilities might be in each of those buckets. Like, so from a business perspective, the obvious ones are things like, either unclear or undefined requirements, right? And many times when we start a project, we don't have 100% of the requirements nailed down. We might have some requirements that are a high level and some are at a lower level, right? So there's some risk there, right, with not having all requirements at a very detailed level. And then related to that, it could be unclear or undefined business processes. Especially if there's a new business process that you're really looking to automate in some way. And there's risk in that, right? Because there's people involved in that process, and it requires a lot of work to make sure that you're looking at that process from end to end, and that you've got the right people, providing you input into, vetting out how that process is going to work, and what are the inputs and outputs of all the steps and activities along the way. And another one is lack of business ownership, and that's really key.
Yeah.
The times where we don't have clear, in agile terms, we call it a product owner. But, where we don't have clear ownership of the solution, someone that we can go to that will articulate the vision for the team, and that will, kind of really sign off on, the requirements and the acceptance criteria associated with the requirements. And we really are looking for that single owner. The times where we go into engagements where it's a committee of owners, that's a more difficult environment to be in.
That's a risk in itself.
That's a risk in itself when you're kind of going to a committee for guidance and direction. So that's another vulnerability, right? And then just and we all know, there's new requirements that pop up right throughout a project. It's just the reality of, implementing something new. So, those are just examples of, areas of vulnerability as it relates to the business side of things. The flip side of that, right, the technology, right, which is kind of what you're using to, implement a solution. The risks there are, around, are you going to use any kind of new technologies, or, are those technologies new, to either your team or maybe the customer's team?
Yeah.
Right? Because at the end of the day, at the end of the project, the customer has to sustain this, right? So, understanding that up front, and knowing, where there is either new technologies or whether the experience of the team, might be limited with the technology is key to understand. And then the other area is really choosing the right technology, right? We all know, there's a lot of ways to solve a problem with technology. There's a lot of technology choices out there, but, the vulnerability is in, are you picking the right technology that fits, the customer's culture, the customer's, standards, the customer's governance, and again, can that customer sustain what you're implementing?
It seems like it's especially that way with SharePoint. I mean, we're narrowing it down to typically our projects are using SharePoint, but even within SharePoint, you're talking about, especially with the newer apps, which frameworks you're using for it. A lot of different variables are out there that, you do need to factor in who's going to maintain this long term. What's the experience level of the team with these technologies?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're seeing more and more of the front end experience, right? The user experience being done outside of SharePoint, right? We're seeing a lot more of that being done with, more of the JavaScript frameworks, like Angular. So, that's a component of it. And then we're seeing a lot more of, the need to extract data and content out of SharePoint, right? And there's a lot of ways you can do that. So really understanding those things and understanding what the customer is going to be able to consume and maintain is key, right? And there's risk associated with that, right? Those technology choices can cause risk.
Don't you die on me, Bruce. Don't you
take
die
a drink.
on me. Take a drink. Good.
And the last thing under technology is the other obvious one too. Data protection, privacy and system security. To the point, Danny, you were making, either nobody can get into the system because it was too tightly secured, or everyone can get in, and that isn't supposed to get in. And then just overall, just really protecting, data is becoming more and more critical to most of our customers, right? And really understanding those requirements and those needs around data protection, data security, is key in any project. So the next area is kind of people, right? I mean, people is, a dynamic in any project, whether it's an IT project, it doesn't matter really, right? We're all different. We've all got strengths. We've all got weaknesses. And it's a dynamic that can impact a project, right?
There's definitely no logic to human behavior.
There is not at all. But some of the things I kind of captured, around that, and I alluded to it a little bit earlier on the business side, but really, again, it's real critical to have that clear business owner and champion. That single person who is going to kind of who's got the passion, the vision, around what you're trying to accomplish, and can rally the rest of their organization, around that passion, around that vision, including us, right, as a partner in developing that solution. And then the other thing is just having committed resources, especially from the customer side, from start to finish, right, and getting the right subject matter experts and the right people that have the domain knowledge, right, around the functional area that you are working within. That is so key, and just having those people involved from the beginning. It's not that you're going to just throw this thing over the fence at the end, right? It's really getting those people involved up front.
And that's typically tough because sometimes the reason that they're bringing us on is because they don't have the bandwidth internally to do this. So having the expectation that they're going to be involved, and we try to minimize the amount of involvement, but it seems like that could be it could be a big risk on projects, especially they're already they've already got 10 other projects they're working on. This happens to be project number 11.
Yeah, and that's very, very common.
Yeah.
Most everybody in today's business world is very stretched. And a lot of times we're asking business people to come in and be members of our team, right? And they still have to do their day job.
Yep.
So it's definitely a challenge, and there's vulnerabilities there, right? There's risk. And the other area is adoption, right? And I kind of put it in two big buckets. When I think about adoption, there's the usability of the solution. Will it be used? Is it usable? Is it easy to use? Is it intuitive? It's kind of that person to system interaction. And then the other thing is, and I've mentioned this earlier, can the customer sustain it? I can build the best solution in the world, but if the customer can't, take care of the ongoing care and fitting of that solution, on their own, right, then, that requires more investment from them, which some customers make that choice proactively, but, we believe that, we should build a solution, with a technology that solves the problem that the customer can sustain.
Yeah, it was funny. One of the customer satisfaction surveys that we got back this week was they commented as, I feel like I'm growing in my career in getting a working application out of the project. It was one of those good things to hear that we're growing alongside with the client. They're learning new things. It's like. And then, they get a working application out of the whole thing as well, and something that they'll be able to sustain, which is great.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a great point. And that's a mitigation technique that we've used is, having customer developers kind of as part of our team.
Yep.
So that way at the end, they know exactly what was implemented. They were participated in implementation, and therefore they can kind of extend the application and sustain it.
One of the interesting things that I overheard while we were meeting up with them in the retrospective was they could explain to people why certain decisions were made, which I think in the end is going to help with adoption of that solution as well. So that, you decided to do it a certain way and they were able to say, well, we did it this way because of this. And that would help in the end with people adopting it and saying, okay, I understand why it's done that way. And they end up using it because they have a better understanding of why it was done that way.
Yeah, that's a great point, Danny. I mean, a lot of times, we all know we could be constrained by budget or schedule. And in your example, it was a schedule constraint for our customer. And they recognized that and accepted it and were willing to make compromises on scope, and how far we took an implementation of a specific feature because they knew, they had a time constraint.
Go Braves.
And then the last area, kind of vulnerability is just, I kind of call it collaboration. Right? I mentioned it a little bit around people, but, we truly view our projects as a collaborative effort. It's not that we're off in a vacuum building a solution for a customer. We want to collaborate with that customer. We want them engaged. We want to have that shared vision, the shared goals, and we want the team to be committed. We don't want boundaries, between, either on our team, within our team, or with the customer. We want, people to be able to step up and say, hey, I can help with that. I can do that. Let me take that task or that piece of the project. I'll take it and run with it. We're open to that. We believe in being, open, transparent. We make sure that anybody's willing to raise issues and impediments, and as a team, and that team is really us and the customer. Everybody is willing to step up because we're so driven by that common vision, that common goal, and getting and seeing success at the end.
Well, I think it's built into the process, because you've got, with the daily stand-up, you really are on a daily basis checking in to see what impediments are getting in your way, and it's just built into what you're doing on the project, and then the customer can sit in on any of these stand-ups as well. So it's not like we're going off and running off and doing something and they don't really understand what's happening on the project. So people can listen in on that if assuming if they've got the time to do it, that's again something we were talking about earlier. But at least we're upfront, and you can you're transparent about what's going on the project on a day-to-day basis.
Absolutely. So, Dave, what I want to kind of go into next is, we talked about where some of the vulnerabilities could kind of be, driven from, but, what do we do, right? 3Will, what are some of the techniques that we apply, to really kind of help mitigate these potential risks, these potential vulnerabilities? So that's kind of the next bucket of things I wanted to talk about.
Sounds great. Let's do it.
Yeah, so the first one is following Agile Scrum. And people are probably going, oh man, this guy's just trying to sell his process. He's talked about Agile Scrum before. He's just selling, man.
You try to sell a book on us, man.
But
Bruce's big book of Agile.
That's right. Coming soon. Coming to a book
downloadable today.
That's right. No, but and so the piece of Scrum really that I want to talk about here is that, I'm a big believer in that. Whenever you're going after a project, right, you're going after a lot of times a fairly large problem domain, right? And I'm a big believer in any kind of, when you're solving business problems, the more you can break that business problem down into smaller pieces, and you're biting off a smaller piece, you have a much better chance of success, right? Trying to swallow something big whole, man, there's a lot of pain with that. But Agile Scrum, you break things up into iterations, right, or sprints, as we all know it. And what I love about that is, you're delivering deployable components of the solution after every sprint. We talk about the concept around here of kind of failing early, right? So the sooner I can start to get features in front of a customer, them hands-on the keyboard, the better off I can get feedback to find out if we're heading in the right direction. If we're meeting expectations. So I want to do that early, not late. The fact that you have those deployable pieces, every sprint is huge, right? And so we have kind of that early and continuous engagement with the customer. Again, we're not throwing something over the fence at the end and say, hey, go ahead and perform your testing. Tell us what you think. The customer's involved. They're doing UAT as we go. Every single sprint, we're going to put it in a test environment and ask them to test it and validate it and provide us feedback. So, that it's the iterative piece of Scrum. To me, that is risk mitigation, because you're doing incremental delivery, you're getting incremental feedback, you're inspecting and adapting, every single sprint.
And then I think also when you do retrospectives at the end too, you're getting a feedback cycle there too, which is nice.
It is, and those learnings are great, because in many cases, we might have just a version 1 or phase 1 of a project, right? Because again, we might be constrained by budget maybe or schedule, and we prioritize our requirements, our user stories, and typically there's a version 2 right behind that. So those project retrospectives, really help us look at how we can get better at our delivery in that next iteration, the next phase of the project as well.
Nice.
So the next area I want to talk about, we kind of consider risk mitigation is many times what we'll do in agile terms is we'll define a sprint zero, right? Or we also call it like an envisioning phase or envisioning sprint.
Or sometimes a workshop.
Or sometimes a workshop.
Yeah, sometimes a workshop. Yep.
Yeah, because to me, when you do a workshop or a sprint zero or envisioning, it's all about, understanding where the unknowns are.
Yeah.
Right. What is it you don't know about the business, about the technology, about the people, about the organization, about the process? And you're really trying to vet all that out, right? Ahead of time up front as best you can, because you're trying to eliminate risk and uncertainty, right? So you do that your very first sprint, your very first phase, you're doing that. And that's where we do things like, we take requirements and reframe them up as user stories. Well, we build detailed acceptance criteria with the customer for every single user story.
Tell somebody what is acceptance criteria. What is that? If you've never heard of that before.
Yeah, and acceptance criteria just says, this criteria must be met, for this user story or this requirement to be kind of accepted by the customer.
And that helps with just taking out any vagueness of what you're doing, and really just gets it down on solid terms as far as what you're trying to do to meet that requirement.
Absolutely.
Okay.
It's an easy and clear and concise way to kind of assess whether or not the user story was successfully implemented, and it really aids the testers.
Yeah, because they can. Brandon can come on the project, or Lisa can come on the project, and right away they see the user acceptance testing, or they see the criteria.
Acceptance criteria.
Thank you for the help. And they see that, and that's great areas for them to go test, right? That's
absolutely
well defined.
And then the other thing we do kind of at a larger level is, for a project, we do something called definition of done, right? And that's real important, because you want to have agreement up front with the customer that says, again, it's criteria. If all these criteria are met, do you, Mr. or Mrs. Customer, would you agree that we're done with this project?
Yep.
Right, and some of that, some of the areas of kind of grayness are, as you go into testing, right, and you end up finding issues, bugs, defects, whatever you want to call them. There's critical defects, there's high defects, medium, low, all with different levels of severity. Well, it's the customer's expectation that you're going to solve every single one of those, right? Or is it that I only care about the criticals and highs, whatever it might be, but getting that nailed down up front, so we can allocate the right amount of time, right, based on experience on, how many issues, defects might come out of a testing effort, but again, it's all about setting expectations, and then you having a way to measure that and say, hey, we are truly done, with this project.
I'm working on a campaign right now, which is 3Will creates defect-free software. Are you cool with that?
Go for it, Danny. See, then it comes down to the definition of a defect. We can work around that.
So I can see a little apostrophe beside it.
We can. No defects.
No defects at all. Really? Yeah. People in software development, their heads are exploding because they realize there is no such thing as defect-free software. So.
Absolutely not.
What's next?
So a couple other things, just kind of as we think about envisioning and sprint zero. Something else we do is we do a lot of things called technology spikes. Right, and I mentioned kind of a vulnerability is either I'm working with a new technology, or maybe there's 2 or 3 ways I can implement a requirement. 2 or 3 technology choices I can make. Well, I might do some quick proof of concepts, right, around those technologies. I actually might try to implement some subset of a requirement, and I might have to kind of look at how long it takes me to solve that, so I can kind of forecast what it might take to apply that technique, that design pattern, that technology across multiple requirements. So it's a way for me to take any kind of technical uncertainties, and eliminate those uncertainties and
Nice.
come out of it with, we think this is the best path to go down. This is the best technology choice to solve this requirement.
Is it
So-
tough to sell that to a customer as far as them paying for that?
Actually, no.
Yeah.
Because I think, they want to understand and they want to feel confident that we're making the right technology choices. And they want to understand, especially because there's choices that we can make.
Mm-hmm.
They want to understand, what are the pros and cons of making those choices. Because there's also investment associated with all that too,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Because some technology solutions are easier to implement than others.
Yep.
So there's trade-offs and decisions that have to be made. And we're big believers in giving customers the information, the data, for them to make decisions. We might make recommendations, but ultimately we want them to decide. And then kind of related to that, we also do a lot of, I'll call it UX, user experience proof of concepts, right? Which could be design, but we like mocking things up. We actually like, being able to get in front of a customer and showing them what the user experience might look like. And it might not be working software, but it might be HTML mockups. There might be some hotspots and links on pages that will show you kind of the connection and linkage between pages. So again, trying to get early feedback on the usability of a solution.
Mm-hmm.
And will a customer, will a service center rep, right, be able to quickly answer a question from a customer, right? So let's mock what that experience might look like up, and let's let those service reps come in and look at it and get some hands-on experience in kind of a simulated environment. So you're not fully developing the app, but you're developing enough of the experience so that you can get early feedback, right? And again, eliminating risk and uncertainty.
Yep. Nice.
The next area, just kind of risk mitigation, and everybody's familiar with this, right? It's testing, right? And testing is risk mitigation, man. That's what it's all about. Danny, you want to talk about before this? I mean, you can test forever,
Yep.
right? We all know there's a lot of permutation and combinations, a lot of logic paths that you can go down, right, to really understand. Do I have every logic path covered in an application? So, the things I want to call out about testing, some of the things that we're starting to see more interest in and people want to make more investment in is doing things like, coverage testing, coverage analysis, which says how much of my code got tested
Okay.
in this execution of this test, right? So understanding coverage, how much of the code was just touched by the execution of that test. Or, for solutions that are going to continue to evolve, right? They are like products, like a knowledge-based solution, right? Where you're going to continue to improve and iterate that solution, every quarter, right? You're going to continue to enhance it. So a lot of customers are now willing to invest in automated unit testing,
Mm-hmm.
right? So that if I change something, in an application, I can quickly run some automated unit tests, that in essence kind of regression test the application, right? And that takes investment, because automated unit testing isn't free.
Yep.
Coverage testing isn't free. You have to pay for that. But more and more customers are we're seeing them willing to make, those kind of investments. And I think everybody's familiar with QA testing, user acceptance testing, performance testing. Something else we started to do more of too is, I'll call it proof of concept testing. And this might be, especially in an integrated solution where there's a lot of other components, or maybe we're integrating with an enterprise service bus, we're pulling data from multiple systems. We might do a proof of concept test, which is, we kind of call it, pumping water through the pipes, right? So do all the touch points work, and can data get from point A to point B to point C to point D, the way we expect it to flow? So it's really that end to end, it becomes more of a technology test before you kind of start to turn it over to end users.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other thing that is becoming more and more important, we talked about it earlier too, is security testing. So, looking at how do I ensure the confidentiality, the integrity, the authentication, authorization, availability, non-repudiation. So, a lot there, right? And again, depending on the organization, that costs money. It takes time. Everybody's got to assess how much of that kind of testing they want to do, to really make sure their application is secure, right?
Yep. It seems to be, I don't know if you were going to cover this or was a part of another one, but I know with Brandon, often he's a part of the experience, a part of the security is overall is testing different like browser types and looking at different options there, and that's quite a bit about mitigating risk around, because the end users might be using any number of types of browsers.
Absolutely, and every browser has their own set of vulnerabilities,
Yep.
right?
Yeah.
And that's absolutely a key part of it for sure, Danny. That's a great point.
We broke my 30-minute barrier.
We're almost done. I'll tell you what, we'll wrap it up here.
Sure.
3 other areas to think about as far as mitigation. One is instrumentation and logging. So we're starting to do a lot more of that in applications we build. Instrumentation and logging just lets you and lets the customer really be more proactive and really kind of capturing metrics around events that are occurring, throughout the application, right? So it lets you kind of be proactive to understand, when events are occurring, especially events that, are critical events or bad events, and capturing those logs, capturing those errors.
Tim and Matthew have done a lot of that, so we've actually talked about that a couple of times, how important that's become, especially on the longer term sustainment projects, to have that as a component for managing risk.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah, especially when you got big apps that are being used by a lot of users.
Yep.
Right. You really want to put more of that instrumentation and logging in there, because it's, if things begin to break or performance begins to degrade, you got to react quickly. And that instrumentation and logging can really help you narrow down, what might be causing errors in an application.
Well, we all know it's Tim's code. We just need to have the proof that it is Tim's code. So
exactly.
Yeah.
The other two, risk assessment. I mean, everybody does that. We do that. My point on risk assessments is, everybody does it, but what we do a great job of, I think, is we look at that risk assessment every week. Mm-hmm. Right? We don't just do it once, put it in a document library, put it on a file share somewhere, and never look at it again. We take it seriously. We look at it. And then the other thing that we started to do too is we call them kind of leadership status reviews. And this is where on a bi-weekly basis, we get the leadership teams of all parties that are invested in a project, right? And we look at scope, schedule, budget, but we also look at impediments. We look at risks. We look at team collaboration. So it's a good way to really have everybody sit down. We believe in total transparency, so we want to kind of raise issues, risks, concerns. And we want to have good open discussions as a leadership team on things that we as a team can do to help mitigate those risks. So that was kind of my last point, Danny.
Nice. Well, I know just to sort of wrap us up here, sort of tactically on projects, I know we have a client extranet, and that extranet has a risk list on it, which has all of the, the risk, the severity of it, the likeliness of occurrence, and mitigation plans around it. So it sounds like that's something that is that something that's reviewed for the status report that goes out on a weekly basis? So is that sort of the weekly check?
Well, we do have the extranet site, and all our customers have access to that. That's all kind of part of us being transparent. But we do include our risk assessment. Or we take the top risks from our project, and those do go out on the status report every week. So we really try to call out what we see as the critical risks. And we have something called a RAG status, red, amber, green. So, for things like scope, schedule, budget, dependencies, whether it's internal, external, we kind of indicate, where things might be turning amber, right, which is kind of a warning, or red, which is we have some issues, right, or some risks. And we try to really call those things out. It's the very first thing you see on our status report. So, we believe in being transparent and kind of hitting those kind of things head on.
And that's great, because I know just somebody who is, your project sponsor, they want to the information, but again, they're overloaded with information. So having that once a week status report that really calls out, hey, we need your attention on this thing. Whether you're using visuals or whatever you can do to aid that is really important. And also, you don't want to cry wolf too many times either. You want to say, hey, this is a real risk. This is something we need to look at. There's a high probability of this occurring, and having a way that's a part of our process to do that is very important.
Absolutely.
Great.
Absolutely.
Well, I can tell you care about this subject.
Oh, I do for sure.
You really put some thought behind all of this, and you know what? It shows up when you get, we've gotten a couple of NPS. Tommy and I talked about Net Promoter Score, and we've, the 10s are flowing in, and I think that has a lot to do with you managing, and you and the project managers and everybody at 3 Will managing risks appropriately, and people love that. I mean, yes. It's we're all trying to understand what can come and bite us, and everyone here is trying to manage that on a daily basis, and you really thought this through well, and are doing a great job. Thank you, Bruce.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody, for listening, and have a wonderful day. Take care. Bye-bye.